Now, the launch of your book very much coincides with the departure, or your departure, from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Was it a coincidence or strategic?
I think pure coincidence. I've been writing this book for almost 10 years, but really focused it in the last 2 years. It's an enormous effort to write books, and as I learned from my wife, who's written 4 books, I always thought it was easier than it actually is. But no, it's pure coincidence.
All right. Now, in the book, you reminisce about your years in the first Democratic cabinet in South Africa and your contribution as a minister, the country that we were in 1994 and the country that we've become in 2010. What are your views?
Well, I think we still face huge challenges. The same challenges we faced in 1990 when Mandela was released from prison and the political organizations were unbanned. It's joblessness, it's youth unemployment, it's schools that don't work and clinics that don't function to meet the needs of our people. And I think these are challenges that face us today. While we've made tremendous progress, there's an enormous way we still have to go in order to fulfill what are rights of people enshrined in the Constitution.
All right. Now, essentially, when you joined government, you were a Labour candidate, although your party ideals were very, very strong. And the tension between the Labour constituency within the tripartite alliance and the ruling party is still very much a problem that persists today. And it's a problem that's starting to affect the generation of fresh and new ideas and the driving of policy. Why are these tensions there?
Well, as I say in my book, you know, the independence of the Labour movement is almost written into the DNA of COSATU. And COSATU is never going to be a conveyor belt of any political party. It's an independent organization that carries with it political aspirations of the working people. And so it's an alliance on the basis of a program. If that alliance does not meet the objectives that COSATU has set for itself in dealing with joblessness or dealing with poverty or inequality, then that alliance is not useful. So I think there has to come a point in time, either the alliance is working or it's not working. And that's a choice that the leadership on all sides have to make. But for me, the alliance has been very important because we must not underestimate the degrees of tension and restlessness amongst our people. You know, the threat of xenophobia, ethnicity, tribalism, you know, narrow nationalism. The alliance has always been like an anchor in our society, you know, defending non-racialism, defending the rights of women, defending the developmental state that we want. So I think there are problems, but there also, it holds the potential for the future.
What we've seen is labour unions increasingly becoming agitated, and some would even say there's a militarism in the way in which industrial disputes are handled today. And what keeps on coming to the fore is Labour saying, in this instance, executive pay is excessive and ostentatious, and workers need some better compensation above inflation, but also commensurate with the rates of income growth for executives. Essentially, it's a whole issue around the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and Labour using their platform to agitate and articulate for greater equalities. As this economy grows and develops, the disparities are widening. Why is that? Well,
you know, I think they're very legitimate in being aggrieved about that. The Gini coefficient, which measures inequality between the rich and poor, has remained the same. Poverty remains the same. Unemployment and joblessness remains the same. And increasingly, the individual worker is supporting more and more dependence as people are unemployed or as people are retrenched. So I think there is a real debate, but the more important root cause is the choices we make as a society. And I think there we need to have a frank debate about it. Youth unemployment is a time bomb in this country. If the official statistics say that 52% of youth between 16 and 23 do not have a job and are unlikely to ever have a job, and that could potentially grow up to 70%, which is there in some of our informal settlements, that's a time bomb. And if one looks at failed states around the world, that youth bulge is a primary driver of insecurity, because young people and the poor in our country feel excluded by the system. They feel marginalized. They feel that no one is listening to them. And in a context where there's political arrogance, it further exacerbates the problem. So I think we have to have the humility in government. We have to have humility in the private sector to say, what is the choices we have to make as a society and as a country that is inclusive, socially inclusive? Because at the moment, there are millions of people who feel excluded.
You use the word responsibility. We must decide and define the responsibilities we have. And this is also another debate that is in the underbelly of the problems here, is that business feels that it is their responsibility to create jobs, it's the responsibility of government to create an enabling environment, and it's the responsibility of labor to ensure that workers are productive. But nobody's actually fulfilling that responsibility. Why are we having this disconnect? If we're a developmental state and we're all agreed that growth should be above 6%, jobs should be growing, people should be productive, people should have the decency and the dignity to earn an income and provide for their families. If we're all agreed that these are our ideals, we're not meeting those targets. Why is that?
Because it's an issue of accountability. You know, what do we do when people fail to deliver? So whether that's a teacher in a school who decides that on a Monday and a Friday he's not coming to school, whether it's a counselor who feels that he can sell a tender, or whether it's a politically connected elite who feels they have the power to buy licenses and corrupt the state. I think this is it. We have allowed a culture of greed and corruption and entitlement to creep into our society. It was never intended to that we do that. I think what we need is a highly mobilized social movements that demand accountability, that we are uncompromising, that we reject mediocrity, whether it comes from the private sector, whether it comes from NGO, whether it comes from labor. I think we should be demanding as parents that there's proper teaching taking place in our schools, that the counselor does what he's paid to do and delivers the service that we are demanding and have a right to.
All right. Now, under your tenure was the Reconstruction and Development Program that was the foundation of the economic strategy going forward. Then there was GEAR, which is seen actually as being a little bit too pro-business. And then there have been other things like Shared Growth Initiative, ASGISA, to try to deal with these inequalities. So a lot of input in terms of policy formation. But the targets, again, the desired effects and the deliverables not met. What is the problem in that regard? Because it's not as though people haven't applied their minds to the solutions in South Africa, but it's in the execution that a lot of things go pear-shaped.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with you, Lerato. I think we've had too many conferences, too many policy statements. We know what has to be done. Our schools and clinics don't work. We've got to get them to work. Local government does not work, and largely because there are individuals that are pursuing their own individual interests rather than the collective interests of communities. We know what has to be done. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out how we build a country. If CNBC is not operating in a fully optimal way, the shareholders will fire the CEO. That's what we require. If something is not working and the person that has the mandate and the obligation to deliver to us our rights is not delivering, then we should call the person to order, and there should be a consequence. There isn't a consequence at the moment.
Post-World Cup, we talk about social cohesion and unity, that the football united this nation. 1 week after the World Cup, xenophobic attacks have erupted. Public servants are saying that they're going on strike, etc., etc. Was the World Cup social cohesion real or very superficial, and why is that?
Well, I think that hosting a magnificently successful World Cup did a lot for our psychological state. And it created a momentum that we need to harness. We delivered against all the Afro-pessimism in the world. And we delivered brilliantly. The government needs to be congratulated. The local organizing community has to be congratulated. But if we can deliver such a magnificent World Cup, why can't we run our schools properly? Why can't we fix up health and education in our country? Why can't we fix up service delivery? I think those are the challenges that face us, and we need to be uncompromising and demanding now that there is performance.
Do you think there's sufficient political will?
Well, if there isn't political will, we need to stand up as citizens of South Africa and demand it. I think we've become too demobilized as a society. We have people in leadership who think we are living in a feudal area where they have some divine gift to rule over us. I think we need to demand accountability. I think the central debate in our country today should be accountability, whether that's from a private sector businessman or from an NGO or from a government minister.
What about accountability across Africa? You've also used your work to lobby for issues such as food security, nutrition, healthcare across the African continent. And again, some people would say, everybody knows what needs to get done, but it doesn't get done because of the corruption you've mentioned and because of the lack of accountability and mechanisms to hold leaders accountable.
You know, I recently read a survey that was done of the richest men in Africa. A number of them are sitting or ex-heads of state. That's unacceptable. I think what we need to be is upfront in demanding our rights and holding our leaders accountable. 1 in 4 children in Africa is malnourished. That means in pregnant mothers and children under 2, they are not receive sufficient vitamins and minerals, and that will permanently affect their ability and potential to succeed as adults. It's a catastrophe. And we need to act on it. But again, I come back to the issue. Unless we have a very highly mobilized and powerful social movements that hold our leaders to account, there will not be that accountability.
All right, final input from you. How do we galvanize a people who are downtrodden, who are reeling from the effects of repressive governments, exercise their constitutional rights through an election, but can't really afford to be part of an ongoing democratic process? This is what's said to be the shortcoming in Africa, is that people can vote and express their democratic rights through an election. But everything that's needed to keep the democracy going, the watchdog role of the media, being active in the economy, are things that are far-fetched because people are so poor, people are so tired.
Well, we need to go back to the lessons of our history, which I've written about. The growth of COSATU started in the hostels, where we had the most downtrodden, marginalized, illiterate, disempowered people. And because we worked with these workers, and they had ownership over the organizations that we built a powerful movement. At any one point in time, there were close to 30,000 trained shop stewards, that even the bombings of our buildings, the mass arrest, the torture could not stop COSATU exercising its power in a political way and on the factory floor. So the issue of poverty does not come into this equation. I think what we need to do is go back to our grassroots, go back to our communities and organize our people to fight for their rights that are today enshrined in many constitutions, but which we do not see it being implemented in practice. It has to go back to the basics, that at the end of the day, countries that are successful are countries where there's accountability. And that's one thing that we should be uncompromising on.